Have you ever, really start to think about what's happening inside your head when you're writing something, maybe using ChatGPT or just good old web search? It definitely feels different, right?
Oh, absolutely. Sometimes faster, maybe easier.
Yeah, exactly. But you got to wonder, is that speed or ease? Is it changing how we actually learn or remember stuff?
That's the million-dollar question people are starting to ask. And there's this really interesting new study we're diving into today that tackles exactly that.
Right. It compares using large language models like ChatGPT versus using a regular search engine versus just, using your own brain for learning, specifically for writing essays.
Yeah, the big puzzle is these LLMs are super convenient, information feels almost effortless, but is there a hidden cost? Like cognitively? Do they change how we learn or even what's happening in our brains?
So this paper, they got pretty specific. They had people write essays across a few sessions. Some use an LLM, some use search, some use nothing external. And they were tracking brain activity with EEG the whole time, analyzing the essays, tool logs, even interviews.
And the quick takeaway, some really eye-opening stuff.
Definitely. Using the LLM seemed to, lower the mental effort and make the essays more similar, kind of homogeneous.
But it looked like it actually hurt their memory for what they wrote. They were way worse at quoting their own essays.
Wow. Okay.
And there were hints it might affect creative thinking too, based on alpha brainwaves. Search engines, they showed different patterns, more about pulling in specific outside info.
And the brain only, folks.
Unsurprisingly, their brains were firing on all cylinders, engaging those networks for working memory, creativity, the heavy lifting stuff.
And didn't they find something about using LLMs early on?
Yes, that's crucial. Early LLM use seemed to impact how well people could write without the tool later. It left a mark? Potentially.
So the big implication here is the tools we use aren't just changing the final product. They're changing the process, maybe the skills we build, maybe even our brains.
That's exactly what this study suggests, and it's why we wanted to unpack it.
Welcome to AI Paper Podcasts. Today, we're digging deep into the specific research paper that looks at LLMs versus web search versus just thinking, all in the context of writing essays to learn.
Yeah, for anyone in a technical field, trying to keep up means constant learning. These tools are everywhere now.
Absolutely. So understanding what happens to us when we use them isn't just academically interesting, it feels pretty vital.
Agreed. We need to understand the human side of this AI interaction.
So we're going to pull everything straight from this paper, for experiment design, the behavioral stuff, the NLP analysis of the essays, and those really fascinating EEG brain results.
Our mission, basically, is to get a clear picture of how these different tools affect things like cognitive load, memory, creativity, bias, and brain activity, all based on what this study found.
It's such a timely piece of research. Like you said, these tools are embedded in so many workflows. We hear tons about what AI can do, but what it does to us. That's the piece we need to understand better.
Exactly. And this paper gives us some really valuable, concrete data points to start that conversation.
Okay, so to really get the findings, we need to know how they set it up. How did they actually design this experiment?
Right. So they got 54 participants, divided them into 3 groups, balanced for age and gender, which is good practice.
3 groups.
Yep. Group 1, the LLM group, they could only use ChatGPT. Group 2, the search engine group, they could use any standard web search, but definitely no LLMs.
Okay.
And group 3, the brain-only group. Just them and their thoughts, no external tools allowed at all.
Got it. Clear lines drawn. And it wasn't just a one-off thing, right? They did multiple sessions.
No, that's a key point. It was multi-session. 3 required sessions and then an optional 4th one.
And what did a session look like?
Pretty structured. You'd come in, get briefed, then they'd hook you up to the EEG headset.
The brainwave measuring thing.
Exactly, the electroencephalography cap. Measures electrical activity from the scalp, then a quick calibration, and then the main event, writing a 20-minute essay.
20 minutes isn't long.
Not at all, especially for the prompts they used. They were actual SAT essay prompts.
Oh, like the argumentative ones. Is failure necessary for success?
Yeah.
That kind of thing.
Precisely. Things that need you to build an argument, not just recall facts. And yeah, 20 minutes is tight. After writing, they did a short interview about the experience, then a debrief.
And the constraints were tight during that 20 minutes.
Super tight. LLM group just had the ChatGPT interface. Search group had a browser, but the LLM was blocked. Brain only. Nothing. Just the blank page, essentially.
So what data did they grab from all this? besides the EEG?
Oh, a whole suite. They had the EEG connectivity data, obviously. They collected all the essays. They logged everything the participants did in the tools, the chat logs for the LLM group, browser history for the search group.
Okay, detailed logs.
Yep.
And they audio recorded those post-session interviews. They apparently also got eye tracking data, EOG, but that wasn't part of this particular analysis they published here.
Right. And session 4, that optional one, what was the deal there?
Yeah, that was a really smart move to look at longer-term effects. In session 4, some people switched groups.
Switched? How?
Some folks from the brain-only group got to use the LLM for the first time, and crucially, some from the LLM group had to go brain-only for the first time.
Oh, interesting. So they could see if using the tool early changed how you performed without it later.
That's exactly it. Does the tool just help you in the moment, or does using it actually reshape how you approach the task even when the tool's gone? Big question.
Huge question. Okay, let's get into what they found. Starting with the behavioral side, what people did and said. What jumped out?
Well, one of the first things from the interviews was about essay ownership. How much did people feel the essay was theirs?
Big differences.
Big time.
Yeah.
The brain-only group, almost all of them, like 16 out of 18, felt total ownership. Makes sense. Yeah, they did all the work.
The search engine group was more in the middle. Only about a third felt full ownership, lots felt partial, but the LLM group kind of split. Half felt full ownership, but the other half felt like none or very little.
Right. If the AI wrote big chunks, it doesn't feel like yours. That tracks intuitively, but it's important they measured it. What about something more objective, like remembering the content?
Okay, this is where it got really stark. There's a figure in the paper, figure 7, that just lays it out. They asked participants to quote a sentence from the essay they just wrote without looking back.
And the LLM group.
They performed significantly worse, way worse than both the search and brain-only groups. In the very first session, something like 83% of the LLM users said they found it hard to quote, and literally none of them got a quote right.
None. Wow.
Yeah.
Striking. Did it get better?
A little bit over time, but they always lagged way behind the other two groups. The search and brain-only folks were pretty similar to each other and much better at recalling their own writing.
So you just wrote this thing, supposedly processed the ideas, but you can't even pull out a sentence you wrote minutes ago.
That's what it looks like. The process of using the LLM, even if you're editing its output, seems to somehow bypass some of the deeper encoding into memory that happens when you're doing the heavy lifting of retrieving, formulating, and typing it out yourself.
Wild. Any other interesting bits from those interviews? You mentioned they did some analysis on them.
Yeah, they used this clustering technique, PackMap, to group similar comments. It pulled out some neat themes.
Like what?
Well, one cluster was basically just the brain-only group talking about how hard it was and how little time they had, that 20-minute crunch.
Oh, yeah.
Another cluster really highlighted how much people across groups valued owning their own ideas, which backs up that ownership finding. And there were strategy insights too, like the LLM group often used ChatGPT for intros early on, but less so later. Maybe they got more comfortable.
Or found it less useful for that part.
Could be. And the interviews with the folks who switched in session 4, the brain to LLM group, they seemed more metacognitive, like they were actively thinking about and comparing the two ways of working.
Okay, so the subjective experience from the interviews really lines up with some of the hard data. Let's shift gears to the essays themselves. What did the NLP analysis show?
First off, variety, or maybe lack of it. The LLM group's essays on the same topic were statistically much more similar to each other, more homogeneous compared to the brain-only group. Their essays showed way more variability.
So the AI assistants kind of nudged everyone towards a similar style or structure.
That's what it suggests. Maybe more efficient, but potentially less diverse in thought and expression compared to letting individuals run free.
Makes sense. What about specifics in the content, like facts or names?
They measured named entities, specific people, places, orgs, that sort of thing. The LLM group used the most by a significant margin.
More than search.
Yeah, about twice as many as the search group, and way more, like 60% more than the brain-only group.
Which kind of makes sense, right? LLMs have all that data baked in, easy to pull out specifics.
Exactly. Easier for the AI to drop in a specific name than for you to recall it or even search for it and decide to stick it in. But where it gets really interesting is with engrams.
The common phrases they use.
Yep, sequences of words. And here you saw clear differences linked to the tool. Take the Philanthropy Topic, for instance.
Yeah.
The search engine group. Their common phrases were heavily clustered around homelessness, homeless people. The LLM group, though, their common phrases were more about giving, donating.
Whoa. Same topic, different angles being emphasized. How did they explain that?
They looked at external data, Google Trends, keyword planner stuff. It suggested that maybe popular search results, maybe even ads related to homelessness, could have steered the search group that way.
Ah, the search ecosystem influencing the focus.
Plausibly, yeah. And for the LLM, the bias likely comes from its training data. Maybe the statistics in the data associate philanthropy more strongly with general concepts of giving. The brain-only group, meanwhile, used words related to broader concepts, like freedom versus justice, suggesting their thinking wasn't as channeled by the tool's biases.
That's a really concrete example of how these tools aren't just passive info retrievers. They actively shape the narrative based on either search dynamics or training data patterns, like a filter bubble, but maybe more subtle.
It really is. It's like the next generation of echo chamber, driven by algorithms and data probabilities.
Now, sticking with evaluation, they had that AI judge versus human teachers bit. What was the story there? That sounds fascinating.
Oh, it was super interesting. They had a local LLM score the essays, and also 2 experienced English teachers, the AI judge, consistently gave higher scores, especially on things like uniqueness and quality. Its scores tended to bunch up near the top.
Higher than the human teachers.
Much higher, often. The human teachers were way more skeptical, especially about uniqueness. They actually pointed out seeing similar structures and phrasings, particularly in essays they thought were LLM-assisted.
So the humans could sniff out the AI influence.
They often could, yeah. They reported picking up on a general LM style, and they also noticed individual things like a participant's unique voice or maybe background influencing the writing nuances the AI judge completely missed.
And the scores themselves disagreed a lot.
Big time, especially on content quality. An essay the AI loved might get a much lower score from a human who's looking for originality or deeper critical thinking, not just fluency or throwing in facts.
Wow. So the tool that helps write the essay also thinks the essay is better than human experts do. That really highlights a potential disconnect, doesn't it?
It absolutely does. What the AI optimizes for may be coherence. Using specific terms might not be what we actually value most in human writing, like real insight or a unique perspective. Raises big questions for education if AI is used for grading.
Okay, let's get to the really deep stuff. The EEG brain data. What was going on in their heads, neurally speaking, while they wrote?
So the EEG was measuring connectivity using this technique called DDTF directed transfer function. It basically looks at how information is flowing between different brain regions in different frequency bands like delta, theta, alpha, beta.
So not just if areas are active, but how they're communicating.
Yeah.
Like traffic flow.
Exactly like traffic flow. Good analogy. So first, comparing brain-only to the search engine group.
Okay.
The brain-only group showed much stronger, more widespread connectivity across most frequency bands, especially delta, theta, and alpha. Particularly strong links between frontal and parietal areas. The network's really involved in working memory, planning, internal focus. They noted electrode F4, right frontal, as a key hub getting lots of input.
So their brains were working harder internally.
Seems like it. More internal coordination needed. The search engine group had less of that broad, low-frequency connectivity, which makes sense if you're offloading some of the remembering and structuring to the search engine. It's kind of a neural signature of that Google effect, remembering where to find it, not the thing itself.
Okay, so brain-only brain networks were buzzing. How did they compare to the LLM group's brains?
Similar pattern, maybe even more pronounced. Again, the brain-only group showed stronger connectivity, especially in theta and high alpha bands compared to the LLM group.
Theta and alpha.
Yeah.
What do those usually mean?
Higher frontal theta is often linked to higher cognitive load, more executive control needed, basically, the brain managing a tough mental task, and that higher frontoparietal alpha, often tied to internal focus, pulling from memory, creative thinking.
And the LLM group showed less of that.
Significantly less, lower connectivity in those key bands and networks. It strongly suggests a reduced cognitive load. The AI is doing some of that heavy lifting, providing content, structure, less demand on the user's working memory and executive functions.
So neurally, it confirms the task felt easier when using the LLM.
That's exactly what the patterns imply. Less intense firing across those networks needed for deep internal processing, memory retrieval, creative generation. But, the potential trade-off is right there. Easier task now, but maybe less strengthening of those important cognitive circuits.
Did they see differences in the direction of brain communication too?
Yeah, that was interesting. The brain-only group tended to show more bottom-up flow activity, moving from sensory or semantic processing areas up towards the frontal executive areas. The LLM group showed more top-down patterns, maybe reflecting the frontal areas, integrating and organizing the input coming from the AI.
Fascinating. The brain working differently depending on whether it's generating internally or managing external input. Now, session 4, the switcheroo. Did that past tool use actually change the brain patterns when they switched?
This is where it gets really interesting, maybe even a bit worrying. Remember, some brain-only folks switch to LLM, brain to LLM, and some LM folks switch to brain-only, LLM to brain. The brain to LLM group, the ones who'd presumably built up those brain-only writing muscles first, when they started using the LLM in session 4, their brain connectivity did increase somewhat. It suggests maybe they could use the tool more strategically, integrate it differently because they had that foundation.
Okay, so prior non-tool experience might help you use the tool better later. What about the other group? LLM first, then brain only.
That's where the potentially concerning finding lies. The LLM to brain group, when they had to write without the tool in session 4, their brains did not show that big ramp up in connectivity, especially in those working memory and creative networks, that the regular brain-only group showed between session 1 and session 2.
Wait, so after using the AI for 3 sessions, when they had to go it alone, their brains didn't engage as strongly as the people who'd been doing it alone all along.
That's what the neural data suggests. Their brain activity patterns were consistent with having trouble with long-term memory retrieval, which links right back to that poor quoting ability we talked about earlier. And it also suggested less coordinated neural effort overall. And this wasn't just in the brain scans. The NLP analysis of their session 4 essays showed they were actually reusing vocabulary and sentence structures, specific engrams, from the earlier LLM sessions, even when writing alone.
Whoa, so the AI style kind of stuck with them, lingered even when the tool was gone.
It seems like it, a pattern you didn't see in the people who wrote brain-only consistently. It really implies that relying heavily on the AI early on might actually hinder your ability to fully engage those cognitive circuits needed for independent work later.
That's a pretty significant finding. The brain adapts, right?
Yeah.
And if the tool is doing the heavy lifting.
Exactly. The brain strengthens connections that get used. If the AI is consistently handling the high-level planning, structuring, synthesizing, maybe those internal circuits don't get the workout they need to become robust. Take the tool away, and you struggle more than someone who built up that strength.
Okay, let's try to wrap our heads around the big picture here. Synthesizing all these findings, behavioral, NLP, EEG, what's the main takeaway about using these tools, especially LLMs, for learning or knowledge work?
I think the core message is pretty clear. Tools like LLMs are undeniably good at reducing friction, making tasks like writing seem faster and easier. But that convenience seems to come with real cognitive costs. This study points to potential impacts on critical evaluation, definitely on memory and coding, the introduction of subtle biases, and just fundamentally changing how our brains engage with the task at a neural level.
So that ease has a cognitive price. This really sounds like cognitive offloading, doesn't it?
It's a textbook example, really. You outsource the thinking to the tool. It reduces the immediate mental strain, which feels good. But the flip side is, you might be missing the chance to practice and strengthen the very skills, critical analysis, deep processing, independent generation that the tool is doing for you. Information seeking becomes less active discovery, more passive acceptance.
And that bias finding is so relevant today, with the enneagrams linked to search trends or training data.
Absolutely. It highlights how both search and LLMs, through their very nature algorithms, data sources, can subtly steer you. It's not necessarily malicious, it's just how they work. But it can create these algorithmic perspectives, limiting exposure to different viewpoints without you even realizing it.
Which has huge implications for education, right? If the goal is developing thinking skills.
Massive implications. If education is about building robust cognitive abilities, not just churning out text, then we have to be really mindful of how these tools might affect that development. This study's neural data is some of the first direct evidence suggesting that reliance on AI for core thinking tasks might lead to those brain circuits being, well, less developed or less engaged.
Did the paper mention anything else, like beyond the cognitive side? I feel like I saw something about energy.
Yeah, they touched on it briefly, not the main point, but they included a table showing an LLM query uses significantly more energy, like maybe 10 times more than a standard web search query.
Huh. So less cognitive energy for me, maybe, but more actual energy consumed by the system. Another trade-off.
Just another factor in the whole equation of responsible AI use.
Now, every study has its limits. What did the authors themselves say were the limitations here?
They were quite upfront about it. The sample size, 54 people, is okay, but not huge. And they were mostly from a specific university setting. So, need more diverse samples, different backgrounds, ages, maybe better gender balance too.
Okay, generalizability is a question.
Right. They also noted that essay writing is complex. Breaking it down into subtasks like brainstorming versus drafting versus editing might show different neural effects at different stages.
That makes sense.
And EEG, while great for timing, doesn't have the pinpoint spatial accuracy of something like fMRI. Plus, the findings are specifically about essay writing. How they apply to other learning tasks needs more research.
Fair enough. And what do they suggest for future research based on this?
Pretty much addressing those limitations. Larger, more diverse groups, maybe combining EEG with fMRI, breaking down tasks, and definitely longer-term studies tracking effects over months or even years.
Longitudinal studies would be key.
For sure. And they also mentioned something really interesting. Collecting more purely human writing to get better at detecting AI content and maybe even developing ways to fingerprint individual human writing styles, something the AI judge in their study couldn't do.
That AI detection and human fingerprinting that feels increasingly necessary.
It really does, as the lines keep blurring.
Okay, so bringing this all home, what's the core message we should take away from this deep dive into this fascinating study?
I think the fundamental point is that these powerful AI tools, like LLMs, they're not just neutral assistants. While they offer amazing efficiency and access, using them actively reshapes our cognitive processes, and as the study shows, even our brain activity patterns during tasks like essay writing.
They change the user, not just the output.
Precisely. And that reshaping might come at the cost of developing or maintaining essential skills like deep memory encoding, critical evaluation, original thinking, and maybe even the neural pathways supporting independent cognitive effort.
So the tools aren't passive. They're active collaborators, maybe even active influences on how we think.
That's a good way to put it. And this study suggests that how and when we integrate them really matters. Maybe, especially in learning context, building those foundational cognitive skills through unassisted effort first could be crucial before layering on the tools. It might lead to better long-term cognitive health and more strategic tool use down the line.
Which leaves us, and you listening, with a really big question to chew on, doesn't it? Given these findings, this evidence that AI and even search tools can reshape our thinking and brain activity, potentially hindering independent skills if we lean on them too much or too early. How should we design learning? Whether it's formal schooling or just how we approach our own professional development.
Yeah, how do we harness the incredible power of AI, the efficiency, the access, without accidentally creating cognitive dependency, without weakening those core human skills of critical thought, memory, and creativity that we value so much?
Is the convenience, the frictionlessness that these tools offer, is it ultimately worth the potential cognitive debt this research hints at? Something to think about?
Well,